Welcome back to another episode of MedTech Trends. I'm your host, Dorian. So today we have with us Mahshid Yassaei. She is the co-founder and CEO of Tali, an information retrieval virtual assistant for providers and patients at the point of care. Now, prior to founding Tali and Evenset, she was also a co-founder of this company, Evenset. It is a custom medical and healthcare software development company that's focused on helping entrepreneurs and established companies bring innovative ideas to life through a fast-paced, agile software development process. Evenset's clients include startups such as the textile computing company Myant, as well as the multi-billion-dollar corporations such as Essity and government agencies like the Public Health Agency of Canada and the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences in Ontario. Prior to Evenset, she also worked for a variety of technology companies, including BlackBerry, where she contributed to the BlackBerry 10 wallet and card holder apps. And I remember those because I was and I still am a big fan of BlackBerry. I just wish it was a lot bigger. But in any case, in her spare time, she watches documentaries from around the globe and enjoys rock climbing at local climbing gyms. So welcome, Mahshid. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
I first learned about your story, a little bit about your story, through an article that I was forwarded from Women of Influence. Really nicely written article and not a very long one. So, of course, that piqued my curiosity, and I wanted to have this conversation and just kind of branch out and talk a little bit about your experiences. And I actually wanted to go back pretty far in terms of how you actually got started in this entire space and what motivated you to get into this space. And then we'll go into Tali and Evenset and what great work is happening there. So I wonder if to start off, you can kind of take us back to how a little bit about your background, because I believe you immigrated to Canada and you were pursuing a master's degree in computer science at the time. I know this is really far back, but I'm really curious about the story as a fellow immigrant to Canada.
Sure. Yeah. I came to Canada back in 2009 for my master's at McGill. And at the time, all I had in mind was to expand my world, to learn from the best profs in a world-class university. And that's all I was looking for. I wasn't thinking as a long-term immigration process, to be honest. But I loved my 2 years at McGill. I learned a lot, and I really connected with what I wanted to do. And right after school, I joined BlackBerry as a security software developer. My master's was also on data security and cryptography. So at BlackBerry, the security software development team was a group of software engineers that were working on features of the OS or other products that was dealing with the more sensitive information of users. So specifically, we were working on the NFC payment of BB10 devices. So it was the idea we had about a secure product was that every engineer on the team needed to be trained and aware of what it means to build a secure product. So I was there for about a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half. And then I went to two other companies. And in 2015, my co-founder and I started Evenset with the idea that I felt like, all three companies that I worked at as a security software developer, I felt like I was reinventing the wheel in every company. So I felt like maybe we are looking at a software team or a software company that's specialized in building secure software. So the idea was that we build all of our processes around this concept that will automate a lot of the testing and validation processes and all that. And my co-founder's background, he did his PhD in biomedical engineering. So with my background and his, the healthcare and medical industry was a natural choice for us. And we obviously were getting more projects in healthcare and medical as well. So I think maybe a year and a half after we started, we went fully focused in healthcare and medical. And over the past 6 years, we've worked with a wide range of companies, as you mentioned, from early stage startups to big organizations, to government agencies. And it's been a fun ride. Like especially since the time we focused on healthcare and medical, um, our knowledge and expertise in this specific market has helped us serve our clients better. Because, like for example, in Internet of Things, for medical cases, we have already built 5, 6 different products that are pretty similar, and we can carry the experience from one project to the other, whether it's from the technical aspects of it to product design to even market entry. And yeah, it's been very fun.
Did you always want to be an entrepreneur, or were you thinking you were going in a totally different direction? Because like we said, you worked for a number of technology companies before you got into the startup space.
Yeah, it sounds a bit cliche, but I actually wanted to be an entrepreneur, at least since I was in high school. I always wanted to start something of my own. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good to know.
Yeah.
And when so we're gonna zoom back in time a little bit here, but you're from what I also read in the Women of Influence article, again, really nice piece. You grew up in Iran. I think you went to an all-girls school, and then when you moved to McGill to do your master's, was there like a culture shock, so to speak? Did you experience things a little bit differently than you initially anticipated? Because I think your motivation was to come here, like you said, to learn from some of the best computer scientists in the world. Um, but I imagine the environment was probably a little bit different.
Yeah, I think I don't want this to be misunderstood. Uh, uh, Women's rights and women's access to education in workplace and such is nowhere comparable to Canada. And, like it's just that it wasn't visible to me. I was like, I'm sure I have no doubt that a lot of women in Iran are still fighting pretty strongly against the issues in workplace, the issues in the education system. I think the point of that sentence was that I was ignorant of those. When I came to Canada, I heard all of these support groups and communities and all that too, because there were so few of us as women in the computer science program. I felt like everybody is paying attention to us. Like, what can we do for you? How can we support you? And I was like, okay. I should admit that in Canada, something that we should celebrate is that at least on the conscious level, people are not fighting this idea. People all agree that women and men don't have equal access to opportunities. It sounds that we're setting the bar too low, but if you have the experience of societies that even fight at that level, you'll see that even to get here, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. But the inequalities in Canada, the ones that I have experienced, are more in the areas where there is still a subjective aspect to the decision making. And that's not because people are malicious or they are actively trying to suppress women. It's just that we all have this unconscious bias toward minorities. Even as an immigrant, as a woman, I still need to constantly remind myself that I might be subject to unconscious bias as well toward the others. So and obviously there is this great practice of trying to make everything objective. So before our education system gets to a level and our society gets to a level that we get rid of this unconscious bias, we try to be very objective. But there's still some processes, like in our like into B2B sales, business to business sales. There is always that aspect of trusting the other person you're signing a deal with. And there's always that aspect of like, you pitch to a business and you're equally competent, but the decision maker just has this guts feeling that one of these companies can deliver better. And that's something that they might not be conscious about, they might not be aware of, but that affects their decision. Or the VC ecosystem. I think you've heard a lot of stories about how women-led businesses are not getting as much funding because there's that subjective aspect to it that we can hardly manage. And these are the realities of being in business, being in a part of the industry that you're one of the very few women, one of the very few immigrants. You just need to be aware of it and continue the education, continue the awareness, and all that.
You mentioned a lot of important points for sure. And as a student of psychology, I mean, I would say that I agree. These are the unconscious biases, especially they're innate. They're sort of, everybody has them. It actually takes effort to try to bypass them and to try to put everything in a more objective frame of mind. Super important to do, of course, when you're in the entrepreneurship space, and when you're working with VCs or private equity firms or any one of these firms. It's supposed to be as objective as possible, but harder to do in practice than it sounds. And
exactly.
There's an interesting point that you made too about the composition of people in these programs, computer science programs as well. I wanted to focus on that just for a second because this space, the technology, computer science, software development space in particular, demand is for people with these kinds of expertise is obviously like through the roof. Especially going through COVID, a lot of things are going digital now. So there's an even greater demand. I think people were kind of expecting it potentially to soften at some point, relatively soon pre-COVID, but now it's like, it's n-fold greater. And so I'm curious, do you see the composition changing, the male female kind of split in these programs? And also a follow on to that, when you hire people for your team, what sort of things do you look for?
Are you asking if this composition is going to change because of COVID, or
if it has, let's say like over the last I don't know, 10 years or something?
I think it has changed, but the growth has been very slow. In the workplace, I think I was reading a research or study from McKinsey, and they were saying that the number of women in leadership roles haven't improved as much in the past maybe 10 years or so. In schools, I haven't looked at the research yet, but I don't think it's a matter of how much money is in computer science and engineering, or how many opportunities are there. I think there is enough. It's a matter of for girls, when they're deciding if they want to go to an engineering school or not, can they picture themselves as a good engineer or not? I'm to tell you a very funny story. It was one evening. I'm not big into video games, and it's not because I'm a girl. I know a lot of girls that are pretty big in video games. I'm just not. And it was one evening that everybody in our company was playing video games, and I was not. And I felt like I should not be isolated in my own company. It's just a matter of like, I think in computer science and tech, we have created this culture of who is a successful computer scientist, who is a successful engineer. That's very hard to resonate with people outside this common image, if that makes sense. And I had to fight that as well. When I first went to my first job, I was the only girl in our team, and everybody was speaking the same way. Everybody was coding the same way. It was just like everybody was a match. and at that time I felt like I have to be like them to be a good engineer. And I think when you're younger, when you're in high school and you're making a decision, it might have an effect on if you feel like you're going to be a good engineer or not.
So the experience that you're talking about in terms of kind of feeling like you're left out of the gaming sort of clique, is that with your current company, or were you talking about from like your past experiences working with previous tech companies?
No, it was at Evenset.
Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, I wonder where that trend came from, but all right, fair enough. So now when you're hiring people nowadays, what sort of qualities do you look for?
Our hiring process is a little tough, I think.
I'm guessing you're not looking for gaming skills.
Apparently, there is a correlation between who we hire and gaming skills, but no, consciously, we're not looking for gaming skills. There is a level of problem solving, a level of attitude to the projects that you have been involved in. For example, a big red tape for us is you have been involved in a small piece of a project, and when we ask like very generic, very basic questions about the rest of the projects, you're like, I have no clue, or there isn't there, like, so that attitude to the work you have been involved in is very important for us. In terms of diversity, I should mention this as well, that peers are very hard to find and to hire. That is a problem. Like, or I don't know. Somebody might come and say, I haven't tried hard, but there are so few gears available in the market that every time we find a good software developer that's a woman, we jump on them, and it was like they already have 4 different offers. So that is a problem. There's not enough women in engineering. That is true. But I think we do fight hard to have the diversity inside the team. I think we have more than 60% people in the team that are born outside Canada. Those are easier to hire than women. That's a kind of a diversity you can actually achieve. But I should tell this story as well. One of our partners once mentioned this same problem on her Twitter account. She said, I am trying to find a woman so bad, and I just can't find any candidates that meets our requirements. And then that Twitter, that thread went viral, and so many people actually posted, hey, you should join this community, you should look at this link, etc. But that's something that everybody, I think a lot of people feel in the market.
That's really interesting to hear. Huh. I guess it's not something that you would typically, or do you do? Maybe that does appear in job posts, looking for women software developers, or would that be?
I don't think it's legal.
Yeah,
I might be wrong, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe not directly. Yeah, I don't think I've seen that before, but it's a shame. But I do know from having spent quite a few years in the academic setting, I mean they do try to promote this stuff. I always wondered to what extent there are, the trend, the impact of these sort of campaigns, if you will, is really affecting certain parts of STEM. But at least in the life sciences, and I come from a life sciences background, I think it's much more evenly kind of split. I think between men and women in those programs. So yeah, maybe it has.
Do you feel the same both at the school and in industry, or is it just based on school?
I would say actually both. Yeah, both industry and schools as well. I also think that the bioinformatics as a program it's been as an educational kind of path that you can take, has been around for quite some time, but it's just that you don't often find a pairing of the skill sets of someone with a strong understanding of life sciences or in healthcare, let's say, with someone that has a very strong understanding of the technical side of coding or analysis, that sort of thing. The combination of those two skills is also not it's just not very common in general, I think, but it's super highly sought after. So that might be contributing to it as well. I definitely wanted to shift into now the company, or two of the companies that you've co-founded. So Tali and Evenset. Evenset was actually founded before, and I believe Tali is kind of a spin-off, if you will, of one of the projects that came through Evenset. Okay, now
Exactly.
perfect. So from what I understood, the central thesis of Tali is to create a patient-centric, or to enable a much more patient-centric approach in healthcare, very broadly speaking. So going from a hospital-focused healthcare system to a patient-focused healthcare system, and the way to do this, the way to create this patient-centric world of healthcare, is to provide tools that are enabled by natural language processing in these virtual assistants. And I wonder if we can speak to that a little bit, because what was the initial sort of impetus, or the spark behind Tali? And then let's see if we can get into how this kind of is branching out into other aspects of healthcare. So how was Tali initially created?
So Tali was actually created, or was initiated based on a challenge that Public Health Agency posted on their website, that they were spending a lot of time and resources preparing evidence-based material for patients and providers, but they were not seeing the engagement they were hoping for, because a lot of people would fall back into Googling their questions or look at American resources because they were faster to find their answers in. The specific content they were hoping to enable or make more available was the Canadian Immunization Guide, which is a 5-chapter book, which is live. It gets edited every maybe even every month or every other month, and they were actually spending all these resources on keeping this document up to date, because it was important to remain up to date and remain available to physicians. So the challenge was, how can we make this content more available? How can we make maybe the same interface or a better interface from a chatbot on top of this content, where people can ask their questions in natural language, as if they are asking their friends or their colleagues, and get the answer from this library of evidence-based resources. So we did 6 months of research with Public Health Agency on studying the state-of-the-art NLP algorithms, to see even if this is possible with the current NLP algorithms that we have. So question answering from open domain resources is a very cutting-edge area of research in natural language processing. And in our study, we realized that we can actually have a combination of the algorithms that are, and train an algorithm that's specialized on medical language and is specialized on question answering on the top of the medical resources, and reach an accuracy that's acceptable at this stage. And obviously, any other AI solutions, as you get more question answers, you close the feedback loop and you improve the accuracy. So it was back in March 2020 that we were at the time that we were going to look into other areas in the medical and healthcare industry where we're dealing with a large repository of unstructured content. So it could be web pages, PDFs, audio and video files, everything that's not a database, everything that's not an Excel file, where it's structured and easier for a search functionality or query functionality. And it was right at the time that COVID hit, and it was funny because it was a very obvious use case for a technology like Tali. There was so much information that was becoming available every day, and there was information and misinformation, and both patients and providers were looking for a trustworthy interface where they can get an evidence-based answer fast. But also specifically for physicians, on top of the medical resources, they had to keep themselves up to date about the government guidelines. So if you're in Alberta, you have the guidelines from AHS. If you're in Ontario, you might have slightly different guidelines, and they had to, like, specifically about Alberta Health Services. One of the family physicians told us that they received these long PDFs of question and answers from AHS every day, that these are the questions that people are emailing to them. So you might find the answers relevant as well. And this was how they were managing the shared knowledge as it was changing every day. So we quickly built a library of evidence-based resources on COVID, and we did the pilot in Alberta. And the feedback was very positive. We were saving a lot of time. The single point of contact for all these resources was very helpful to the physicians that tested our application. But this was just one example. Another huge opportunity for a technology like Tali is in patient education and engagement, we realized. With the shift from the healthcare system that's centered around hospitals and providers to a healthcare system where patients play a more important role, and for patients to play this important role, we need to enable them. We need to educate them. We need to give them the resources they need to be able to play this new role. And there are a lot of organizations in the area of patient education and engagement. What these companies do is that they either create or curate content, patient education content, and they make it available to hospital setups, to physicians, sometimes to patients directly. But we all know that users are the attention span of users is narrowing down so much that it's very rare for somebody to actually look at a long document about their condition if they have a specific question they want an answer to. Sometimes one of the family physicians told us that they print out handouts about their prescription, about their disease, and give it to the patients, but they have no idea if the patient's actually reading those, if they find it helpful, if they have any questions in between visits. So that was another interesting use case, but there's so many other use cases for Tali that we're also exploring.
Okay. So I want to ask quite a bit more about Tali itself, because I'm fascinated by this. Like you said, this is a cutting edge area. And as I was reading about Tali, about Evenset, also mentioned that there's a nice white paper that you guys have on the website, the Tali website. We'll see if we can link directly to it in the description. But super helpful just to understand sort of where the industry is kind of going with these algorithms, these NLP algorithms. NLP has been around for a long, you know this better than I do, for decades and decades. But only recently has there been enough data out there, enough information, content, where you can actually develop these advanced algorithms that can actually understand from context how to answer specific questions that may be phrased in any number of ways. And of course, the medical field might have certain ways, standard ways of addressing certain questions, but now you're putting this into the hands of patients. Patients don't have the training, so they'll ask a question in any number of ways. And so I'm curious, in building this algorithm for Tali, I think it's based, I understood, on public information, publicly available information. So this would be, I mean, there are hundreds, thousands of websites where you can find information. A lot of these are actually validated websites where they're based on medical associations, public health associations, big global organizations. So it's standardized, validated, but it's just so widespread, and there's so many variations of the same thing. So how do you source, or how did you find the information needed to be able to train this algorithm?
So in our co-founding team, we have two family physicians that help us find and validate what resources are trusted in the community of healthcare providers. For example, one of these resources was Merck Manuals. They have resources that are for physicians and also for patients, different set of resources. And so we started talking to them. We actually built a partnership to get all their content to train our algorithm. But there are other organizations that we reach out to. Cochrane Reviews is another organization that has, they're trusted by the physicians and the healthcare community. So that process of finding these organizations was not hard for us specifically. But there was also content on the like PHAC's website that they have a lot of good resources there as well. But on top of all of this, we are also fine-tuning our algorithm using a data set, a growing data set of question answers that we're generating internally. So we have this side product that we are using with students in medical school and pharmacology, etc. They go through these texts and they create question answers, sample question answers. So we have more than 20,000 of these question answer sets. That helps us fine-tune the algorithm to understand how a human might ask a question for in the case of a provider, and then again in the case of a patient.
You know, a thought that just crossed my mind in terms of the question answer. They're medical students, all medical professions that have to get licensed, certified. They have exams. So I'm really curious, would the algorithm work if you tried it on like an MCAT or like some other kind of standardized test? Would it be able to answer things accurately?
Yeah, one of the limitations of the algorithm currently is that we can't answer all questions. So if the question, we can like the accuracy of the algorithm is highest when you're asking a factual question. So factual question is like, can I give an MMR vaccine to a patient with a history of cancer? This is a factual question. But there are other types of questions when you have to do some analysis. The answer is not, and I think these are the type of questions, like in an exam, if you see a factual question, you usually call it an easy question. You either know it or don't know it. The more difficult questions where you have to do some reasoning from multiple pieces of information. Tali is not there yet. I'm hoping that we'll get there in the future as well. But so we might not score high. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, good to know. So this is a really important differentiating factor here. So it'll do very well at recognizing fact-based question answers, but then when it comes to taking a little more context and a couple more, connecting a few extra dots, then the performance will sort of not be as high. Are there any other? So in the white paper, I think it mentions BERT, so the major algorithm by Google, GPT-3, and this is not my area, but are there any other algorithms in the space that are capable of doing that sort of thing? Like how would you compare Tali, for instance, to what Google is capable of doing?
Yeah, so most of these algorithms are trained on English as a language. So what we have done is that we have trained our algorithm on English, and then we have specialized our language model on medical text. And then you can specialize the language model on, let's say, infectious diseases. So this specialization, the same way you go to school and then you go to medical school and then you get specialized in a specific area, the same concept happens for algorithms. So when we're talking about GPT-3, what they've done is that they have given loads of like immense data set of English text to this algorithm. So they understand similarities between words and the concepts based on co-occurrence. So they realize that I don't know, cancer and immunodeficiency usually show up together in a text. So there might be some relevance here or some relationship between these two concepts, but they can't necessarily formulate this relationship, if that makes sense. And I think in Europe specifically, you are bound to use algorithms that are explainable in healthcare and medical. And a lot of these algorithms that are trained on huge data sets are not explainable. So you need to use a combination of classic machine learning and NLP algorithms plus deep learning.
That brings up a question in my mind. To what extent are these algorithms generalizable, and how can you apply them to a lot of different applications? So we talked about the immunization space as an example, and I know that that's a very high, it's a rapidly evolving place, and there's also a need to dig deeper in terms of, what happens, for instance, if a patient does now follow the strict schedule, but then they have to catch up later on, and how do you combine the medications in the correct way to ensure safety and then also effectiveness and so on. So is Tali specifically, is it generalizable to a lot of different applications?
The core of it, which is the language model, is generalizable. But the initial use case that we are focused on, which is the information retrieval, we need to fine tune for every use case. For example, in the case of EMR integration, electronic medical record integrations, an obvious use case has always been information retrieval from doctor's notes. So if there is a note about this patient has a history of, or their mother has had diabetes in the past, and if the doctor search for this in years of notes, they can figure out the history of the patient that way. But each of these use cases, like the information retrieval from each of these use cases, needs a small process of fine tuning. But the core algorithm, yes, it's generalizable.
Since you mentioned EMRs, do you have current examples of like how are you working with certain clients or certain customers that are interested in incorporating Tali into their EMR systems?
Yeah, we're actually actively talking to one of the largest EMR providers in Canada. Unfortunately, I can't mention their name because the deal is not finalized yet, but we have seen a lot of interest from that aspect.
Okay, very good to hear. That's a space that I'm quite familiar with, and having worked with a few EMRs and also the data aspects of this. I mean, at the end of the day, searching an EMR for this kind of thing is very important for being able for the clinician to improve their their efficiency really in seeing patients, developing treatment plans, and so on. There's a whole other world here in terms that we get into like the data space. How do we make the best use of information that's been collected and stored in these EMRs and in private practices and hospitals? How do we actually use that information to do a lot of very useful things for the healthcare system, improving efficiency on a very large scale, customizing therapies and treatments and tailoring them to individual patients and so on. And I'm wondering, is that part of maybe the strategic kind of vision of Tali of being able to help clinicians, private practices, and so on leverage the data that they've collected, and most of it, by the way, is still in notes, paper documents from like decades and decades ago. But is that part of the vision to enable access to these in a very scalable way to make use of it for these types of applications?
Absolutely. Actually, one of the projects that we did with ICES, the organization that you mentioned earlier. So this is the organization that receives a record of your, if whenever you see your family doctor, they receive a record of your visit, what was the diagnosis, what was the doctor's notes, etc. And they have maybe more than 30 years of data from all Ontario. And the project that we did with them initially, maybe we worked on it or started working on it about 2 or 3 years ago, was looking at these doctor's notes first to de-identify all the personal health information outside these notes, so we can actually now release it for this specific use case. Now we have thousands of notes of of teenagers that are experiencing bullying in high school, and how is it affecting their mental health later on or at the same time. And this is the value of a data set of this size with this long history is amazing. And we're actually, with our project, automatic de-identification of those nodes, we can now start digging deeper into that and drag more information. These are all, I should mention that we didn't have access to NLP algorithms of this caliber 10 years ago or 5 years ago. This is an opportunity that has just opened up. And yes, the algorithms are never perfect, and but I think it's the right time to start exploring all these opportunities.
I'm also curious here. So we talked about the onset of Tali. Initially was again, it's a branching off of a project initially with the Public Health Agency of Canada. I see as another example. Are these clients of Tali? Is that the business model?
These were both the clients of Evenset.
Okay.
As clients of Tali, we're talking to other government organizations that are also creating a lot of resources for physicians and patients. But no, ICS specifically right now is not a client of Tali.
I'm now very curious. So when you're pitching this to potential partners, potential clients, whether it's directly from through Tali as the center of focus, or Evenset sort of indirectly, how does the conversation change? Like it can be a pretty complex topic to dive into. Maybe there's some intuitive component, but I think when people generally think about virtual assistants, they think about like these chatbots that pop up on websites, and most of the time they're annoying. So how do you frame the conversation in terms of, this is state of the art stuff? It can do so much for you if you are an organization with a lot of information, and your stakeholders are people that need to access this information very quickly, efficiently, be able to make decisions with the information. How do you pitch to a clinician, another business, or a public agency?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because one of the challenges we were facing from day one was that we would start talking about what Tali is, and like after half an hour of talking, somebody would say, "So how is this different from a chatbot then?" So I was like, "Oh no, this is completely different." So yeah, we deliberately started differentiating Tali from classic chatbots and classic search engine after some point, and creating that white paper again was because of this feedback that we got during our pitch sessions and discovery meetings. Because question answering and information retrieval from unstructured content is not a common use case. It's not a mobile app that every business owner knows about. Like at Evenset, when people come to us and say, "I need this piece of software," we don't need to convince them why this piece of software is important or why a mobile app is important. On Tali, half of our time is spent like, you have a problem and there's a solution for this problem. So I think that's one of the issues of being an early player in a category of products. But on the other hand, you get the advantage of being an early player as well, hopefully.
I think there definitely is an advantage to doing this kind of thing. And again, there's almost a need to kind of shift the mindset, because um, there really are a lot of these search tools, but Tally is not just a simple search tool. Um, Maybe it's a little more akin to, like, you guys have created your own version of like Siri, or something like that. It's of that nature, but it's very specifically medically focused, and that is a whole different ball game than uh, a search function on a random website. So um, when you're, let's say, and I don't know to what extent you've been able to speak with individual clinicians who might be interested in doing something in their practice to actually adopt certain technologies to help them. But you know, how would you, what problems, let's say, would you address to particular clinicians in a medical practice? Let's say if there's a medical practice that has, I don't know, a few dozen centers, all collectively, they all have the same kind of central information system, EMR system, and that sort of thing. But you know, what kind of problems would you be able to help them sort of solve from that perspective?
One of the initial issues as we were interviewing with a lot of physicians back in 2020, we identified that primary care doctors actually check their references 10 to 12 times every day on average. And it takes them between 5 to 10 minutes to find the answer if they want to stick with evidence-based resources. I think we've all had this experience where our doctors starts Googling in front of us and we get uncomfortable, like, what is she doing? Is she Googling my symptoms? And when you talk to them, some of them argue that I know which resources are trustworthy and which are not on Google, and you don't. So my Googling is different than you Googling. But they actually, on the other hand, they actually pay for services that gives them evidence-based resources. That's all they do. Companies like UpToDate or Dynamet. But it takes them so much time to find the answer in those resources that they just fall back into Googling, especially when the patient is in the room. They can't spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes looking for a specific piece of information. So when we were talking to people, this was something that was brought up, like if we can make that information retrieval process a lot faster from those resources, this will add a lot of value. The second is true partnership with EMRs that are active in primary care. We can actually provide that information retrieval from unstructured notes to primary care. And that is very important because primary care is the point in our healthcare system where the physician needs to see an overall picture of the patient. They need to keep in mind all the history of the patient. They need to make the right decision because of this overall picture that they have. So if they miss a specific piece of information, or if they don't get the support they need to actually develop that view of the patient's status, that can cause a lot of problems. So I think the other use case is true partnership with the CMR providers, and providing that kind of support for clinicians. I think it's going to add a lot of value.
I can easily see a lot of different applications here. I think it's almost just an issue of helping people see that there is a solution to very, very common problems. So many organizations are dealing with too much information. I think this is also a point that you made in the white paper on the Tali website, and I've certainly seen it myself. Information overload is one of the issues, but then the other layer to that, or maybe it's the same side of or different side of the same coin, is if you have the information, you need to figure out a way to somehow structure it, and after it's structured, how to retrieve it to answer very specific questions on the go. And this is actually, it sounds like a simple problem. It's actually very, very difficult to figure out. I'm wondering, how can you really convey that sort of message in a very kind of understandable way? And I think there's almost some sobering that kind of has to happen. Like, yes, these solutions are out there, but at the same time, they're a work in progress, and the only way that they're really going to get better is by trying them out on in different contexts, in different settings, and just kind of iterating and improving upon them. It's very much a conversation that still needs to happen.
No, that's true, and I think it's something that we're going toward. It's something that's going to happen in the future, for sure. Because of the way our interactions with information is changing, and it's also our expectation from our interaction with I want to say things. If you take a look at the whole IoT industry, we're getting used to smart things. We are getting used to smart TVs. We're getting used to smart phones and all that. But on the other hand, our knowledge bases and our content is still remaining passive. So somebody creates a content, they get disconnected with the content, and on the other hand, somebody interacts with this content very passively. And Tali is a way to actually make this content smart by letting you interact with the content. And on the other hand, give this insight dashboard to the content developer that tells you, okay, these are the areas where people are asking more questions. This is what they're looking to know. So these are the gap in the content and all that. So that's a common issue in patient education, where the organizations that develop content for patient education are somewhat disconnected with what patients actually want to know in between visit about their condition, and in what language they ask that question and what language makes more sense to them. So basically taking a passive content and turning into a smart content is a trend that's very much aligned with where the whole tech is going and where the world is going. So it is it's a slow process, I agree, but I'm very hopeful that we're gonna get there.
Perfect. I hope so as well. I wonder if we can tackle this in terms of which types of clients you would want to work with that can really make use of Tali versus others that are not quite at a stage where they can really make the most use out of uh, an algorithm like Tali. And then when you're having these conversations, how do you onboard new customers, new clients? What kind of thinking process do you need to bring them through to kind of get at their decision to sort of take a certain approach versus another?
The organizations that we have got validation from, that we have received a lot of interest from this type of organizations, that yes, this makes sense, just after they understood what it is that we offer. One example are patient education and engagement companies. As I said, these are the companies that either create or curate content for patient education and engagement. And all we offer is, which is more patient engagement, is very much aligned with what their core value and core vision is. So we've had very successful pitch sessions with companies in this category, and also with EMR providers. There is a competition for these providers to make their solutions smarter. This was a feedback we received from one of the family physicians. She was saying, we've had an EMR solution in our clinic for more than 10 years now, but we never felt like this EMR solution was a team player. It was more like a hassle or a load to what we were doing during the day. And I think this is the kind of view that EMR providers are looking to change. They're looking to be an actual team player, to be an assistant to the physician. And because of this interest and this activity, I think that's another type of organization that we've seen interest from. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, I missed that.
First one, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head in terms of which ones this kind of solution makes sense for and which ones are not quite there yet. And I think the second part of the question, now I have to reflect on the question itself. The second part of the question, now I'm drawing a blank. you know, that's okay. There was another interesting point that came to mind here. I've also heard you talk quite a bit about, and this is part of your experience in the industry as well, but the data privacy and the security aspect of it. And I'm wondering, to what extent does that topic of conversation come up when you're pitching potential clients as well? Like how concerned are they that this is going to work with their EMR, and are they going to run into technical issues or compliance issues or anything like that? Does that come up?
It's always there. Like, this is I haven't been in any pitch session, I think, both at Evenset and Tali, where there was no questions about security and privacy and about liability. That's another area when people are concerned about, like, what if the answer that's returned by Tali is not the right answer? And that's why, like, for Tali specifically, we tried intentionally to avoid generating any text. We only retrieve the information. So when the algorithm is inaccurate, we are only irrelevant, but we're never wrong, if that makes sense.
Okay.
But on the security and privacy, integration with EMRs, the whole process becomes very slow. And I'm one of those very few in the industry that actually advocate for that slow and thoughtful process of integration. Because sometimes I think we rush into the innovation process in the healthcare and medical industry, and we put patients' most private information and sometimes even their lives in danger. So um, as we used to say, like innovation process in healthcare needs to be fast and slow at the same time. I think, yeah, the integration process, because of the security and privacy, is slow, but for good reasons.
Makes sense. That is definitely one of the questions I wanted to ask you about. At the data security privacy, do you guys work with other vendors when you're putting together a product or service? Let's talk from the perspective of like Evenset, or do you offer everything in house?
Yeah, so our approach to product security is that it needs to be end to end. So there is you can't outsource security by saying I'm making this organization responsible for my security. You can't just do whatever you want to do, like in building the product, and then a week before launch say now I want to make our product secure. So this security needs to be a shared mindset of every engineer, every product designer in the company from day one. So for that reason, and honestly, a lot of the tools and technologies that help you make your product more secure are readily available. It's just a matter of everybody in the company knowing where the priorities are so they can make the right decision. So if everybody in the organization knows that security is the top of the priority list, then they know how to make their decisions inside the product. Because you can put a layer on top and pretend that everything is secure and reliable. But deep down in the lines of the code, um, an engineer that just doesn't know how much security is important to you, will make a decision that ruins everything. That's why that's why our view of security is a lot deeper, and that's what I learned from being at BlackBerry. BlackBerry is also was also very famous for their security products and the security of their BlackBerry devices and all that. And that's because of this mindset they had. That is not every engineer needs to know why this piece of information is important, and what's the cost of a breach to the company and to the user.
Such an important point. Of course, you've talked about that in previous talks, in previous presentations as well. Mahshid, I know we're kind of running short on time here, but I am really curious when you're talking to prospective customers, clients, partners, if there's already a company that's been in business for years and years, uh, how do you address the problem of data security, privacy protection, all of those issues to an established company versus a startup company where they're starting from the ground up so they can start to incorporate it right away?
With large organizations or the organizations that already have a product in the market, we usually start with a gap analysis phase where we look at the state of the product and we try to identify the areas where security and privacy have been compromised. Because you need to start from a starting point and you can't really throw everything out and start from scratch. So that gap analysis phase is very important to understand at least what is the current status, and then prioritize the actions you need to take to bring this product from its current status to an acceptable status. And then from then on, you will implement all the processes and all the resources that are needed to continue to build a secure product.
But it's totally possible to do, right? To bring someone, a big player, up to speed.
I think so. Like there are some decisions that are more expensive to revert. So you will face challenges and questions where you need to bring more stakeholders to the table. Like this is the cost of this wrong decision in the design or in the code. This is how much it takes to redo this process and then make a collective decision. And some of these decisions are very tough decisions, very costly. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that's not doable in building a secure product.
Okay, I like that optimistic outlook. I'm sure a lot of other people will as well. Okay, maybe just one final question, and then we'll wrap up. If you look over the next, let's say, 1 to 3 years, are there additional features that you're looking to add to Tali, or additional data sets that you want to train the algorithm on, or additional products that you might think of spinning off or adding to the solutions that Tali currently offers?
I think our path in making the algorithm smarter and smarter is a long path. Adding contextual data to the search and to the content is a long path in itself. For example, through an integration with an EMR solution, we can add more parameters about the patient's age and sex and all that to the question that's not directly referring to those, and make a better or smarter decision. So all this, adding all this context, making the algorithm smarter is our short-term and long-term focus for now.
Okay, awesome. I love the product and service you guys have for listeners. Evenset and Tali, both websites, super useful to read up on them. Evenset also has a number of case studies on there, so you can go and check that out. You guys have built out software for a number of healthcare and non-healthcare companies, including a swimming company. I'm an ex-swimmer, so I thought that was really awesome. So really enjoyed this conversation, Mahshid. I wish we can continue it for a while longer, but we are out of time. So I'd love to have you come back at some point as new things happen with the company, and there's updates, and we'd love to hear more about it.
Absolutely, I would be happy to.
Wonderful. All right, thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.